Okay, hi. Guilty pleasures. I had a lot of trouble thinking about guilty pleasures because of all my pleasures, I don't really feel guilt. And I think that if you have pleasure, you shouldn't feel guilty about it. So I think about what people do call guilty pleasures, like chocolate. I mean, come on, every magazine will tell you how good chocolate is for you. So it's not really a guilty pleasure. So that's not a guilty pleasure. And I'm thinking and thinking, I don't really think I have a guilty pleasure now. I like to give chocolate coins out as tips. Maybe that's a guilty pleasure. I mean, not as a tip. It's only to people that maybe at like a food court or something, the person that wipes the table, I'll throw a few of those little foil-covered coins out for them. Little treats. It's more like an act of random kindness, I would think, not a guilty pleasure. So that's not it. I thought about boxing as opposed to bowling. Boxing meaning eating ice cream out of a box. I mean, it's convenience. It's a convenience rather than bowling in a bowl. It's not a guilty pleasure. I know other people do that. I know. So I'm thinking, and I think about, well, maybe a guilty pleasure is something that I've had a lot of fun doing over the span of my lifetime. And I'm thinking about it, and it's like, yeah, you know, about the tripping, maybe tripping. When I was a kid, I mean, in our neighborhood, when I was a kid, families had a lot of children. And we had a huge movie theater, the Waverly Theater. It's not far from here. It's no longer in movie status. It's something else. But all the kids would go to Saturday matinee. And it was packed with kids, packed, much to the dismay of the owners, I'm sure, because kids were everywhere. And this was a grand theater at one time. It's not one of those complexes we have now. It was a huge theater, beautiful, thick velvet curtains that would open and close for the stage. It had gold leaf and wood carvings and stuff and velvet furniture in the lounge. And us kids, all the kids of the Saturday matinee crowd, would be all over the place. There'd be chewing gum stuck on things. It was a haven for children on Saturday because the parents were not around. There were no adults. We were free. Adults, it was a haven because their kids were someplace safe. I usually would choose the aisle seat. And when the lights would dim and the newsreel would come up, there would still be a lot of kids running around that just couldn't settle down. And I'd just see a kid running up and I'd move my foot out and trip him. And then look very intently at the newsreel and know that this kid has no idea what tripped him up. But he fell and he didn't have any idea. It felt good. That was a good feeling. It's a pleasure, but I didn't feel guilty about it. It was fun. And I realized later in life, as an adult, I used to be a school bus driver. I went only in the mornings to make extra money for my husband and I. We were going to buy a house, and I drove a school bus in the neighborhood where I wanted to buy a house. So it worked. It was beneficial. But being an only in the morning person, because I had a full-time job, I would never get the same bus route. And I was like a substitute. And one day I had this big 48-seat or whatever, stick shift. I'm driving it like a giant Volkswagen. There was a kid that I had to pick up that was very close to where I lived. And I knew he was a punk. He was what they would say now, a bully. But I picked him up, and sure enough, he's in there. He's nudgy. He's a middle schooler. The middle schoolers, they're nudgy. And he goes and he's bothering kids, and he kept jumping out of his seat. And I would pull over, and there was a big mirror, and I would look in the mirror and say, you gotta sit down or the bus driver can't continue on its route, and everyone will be late for school. So he'd sit down, and sure enough, it would happen again a second time. Have to look up, tell him, you gotta sit down. We can't go any further until you sit down. And third time, I see him in this big mirror. He jumps up, he grabs some kid's hat, he throws it out the window. Well, it was just a split second. I slam on the brakes. The kid rolls forward, and I wanted to laugh, but every other kid in the bus was laughing so hard at him. It just worked like a charm. And I just looked in the rearview mirror and said, uh-oh, was that a squirrel? He sat down in his seat, but you could just see he was seething, and I knew that he was going to seek revenge. But I don't do afternoon bus routes, so some other bus driver got the revenge of that kid, and the next morning when I had to take the same bus out, the kid was waiting, but I was told he was suspended from the bus and I couldn't pick him up. So yeah, the tripping, it was like the same scenario again. I had to use it later on in life, the tripping. My son was now in first grade, maybe kindergarten, I think, and he went to a small little private school in the beginning, a friend's school, and I was walking him down into his class in the morning, and he was so excited because he had just gotten his treasure from the tooth fairy, from the tooth he had just lost. And we were coming down the steps, and he's telling a kid about it. And at the same time, another kid's coming up the steps, and this kid, I could just tell, was going to reveal something about the tooth fairy that I did not want my son to really know about at this stage of the game. So I trip him up the steps. He goes falling. I grab him. Oh, hon, you all right? Oh, you better get off to class now. You're going to be late. And the story never got out. So my son loved the tooth fairy, and I had another really satisfying feeling. I don't feel guilty about this. That was out of necessity. So I have to say, I don't think I have any guilty pleasures. But I want to tell you, thanks for listening, because this was really fun. Thanks. All right, get that guy out.